Good afternoon and welcome to ISPI. Today we are here for the 5th Asia-Europe initiative. That's an initiative that this year is sponsored by ISPI and in partnership with IFRI, the French Institute of International Relations, and the ESDP, the Institute for Security and Development Policy. Today, the topic of the first panel, today's topic of the two panels is the defense is back and Europe and Asia after the war in Ukraine. And today, I'm Guido Alberto Casanova. I'm really glad to welcome you to our event. And in this first panel, we will be discussing the security reform that has undergone Japan last year. Because Japan has been a particular country in after the Second World War because has had a very particular security policy, and today we are going to discuss the change of that policy that occurred last year when Prime Minister Kishida Fumio has managed to review long-standing policy concerning defense, and today we will be doing that with our four guests, which I'm going to present now. On my right hand, we have Ms. Chiyuki Aoi. She is Professor of International Security at the University of Tokyo. We have Axel Berkowski, a professor at the University of Pavia and co-head of the ISPI Asia Center. We have Céline Pajon, head of the Japan research at IFRI. And Jagannath Panda, head of the Stockholm Center for South Asia and the Indo-Pacific Affairs at ESDP. So I will start by asking a question to Ms. Aoi, and because we are talking about the changing defense policy of Japan, and we mentioned that Japan last year has managed to accomplish something quite remarkable for Japan. And so I want to ask you, what is your main takeaway from this defense reform?
Hello. Okay. Well, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to address this distinguished panel and also expert audiences. In response to your question, I think that in most recent defense reform of Japan, a broad-ranging reform was put in place with a strong focus on strengthening Japan's own defense architecture for national defense and fundamental reinforcement of Japan's defense capabilities, while of course other two areas, namely reinforcing joint deterrence and response capabilities of the Japan-US alliance and reinforcing collaboration with like-minded countries are also to be focused. The first area, that is the reinforcement of Japan's own defense capabilities, carries significant implications for the defense budget, as you noted. It is also this area that includes the need for Japan to achieve a whole-of-country approach by integrating Japan's national power, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, and technological, and by systematically combining all policy means in addition to reinforcing defense capabilities. In Japanese defense, concrete efforts here would include flexible deterrent options and strategic communications to continuously demonstrate intention and capability to deter unilateral changes to the status quo by force and such attempts and influence opponents' decision-making. Further, I'd like to stress that in discussing Japan's defense posture, it is important to understand Japan's defense purposes that were considerably reconfigured in the last defense doctrine, starting from National Defense Program Guidelines of 2018. Japan's defense purposes are namely, first, shape a security environment not tolerating unilateral changes to status quo by force. Secondly, deter response to unilateral changes to the status quo by force and such attempts through cooperation with our ally, like-minded countries and others. And third, disrupt and defeat invasion. The first defense purpose of shaping of international environment is very important for Japan because this signifies Japan's strategic and overall vision. The concept was placed as a first defense purpose in the 2018 National Defense Program Guidelines as Japan's ability to create an international environment amenable to realization of its interests and values. Of the first approach of the Japan's defense, that is the strengthening of Japan's own defense capabilities, the emphasis currently is on Japan to possess capabilities that makes the opponent realize that the goal of invasion of Japan is not achievable by military means, and to persuade the opponent that invasion is not worth the cost. Japan also recognizes that such a posture by Japan will also deter similar attempts in the Indo-Pacific region. One of the means to do so, according to the defense reform of 2022, is the so-called counter-strike capabilities to result in strengthened deterrence. The issue was debated over 60 years in relation to the legitimate boundary of self-defense, deemed controversial then in the framework of the Japanese constitution. For example, in 1956, former Hatoyama cabinet gave an interpretation that it considered striking in self-defense enemy military facilities with certain restrictions after an armed attack on Japan occurs will be within the boundary of the constitution. In terms of capabilities, the government hopes to fill in the gap by the deployment of standoff capabilities through the deployment of domestic and foreign-made standoff missiles. In addition to the counter-strike capabilities is a significant development which accompanied lively debates on various aspects of technical and financial nature. What concerns me here, however, is the communications issue. The public interpretation of the counter-strike capabilities varied naturally because of the long history of debates on the concept. There was some outright confusion with preemption, which the government properly denied. There were more subtle questions regarding whether it signifies any shift in the pacifist posture of Japanese defense, whether it implies any shift in post-war defense-oriented policy and posture, for example. With regard to the latter, the government was striking a fine balance between the essentially ambiguous distinction between defense and deterrence by denial. With the assumption here that Japan's counter-strike capabilities will mean deterrence by denial rather than punishment. The government's explanation made clear that the new three conditions of counter-strike and hence counter-strike capabilities are within the purview of the existing constitution. The explanation is that counter-strikes are done as a minimum necessary measure for self-defense and in accordance with the three new conditions for use of force, namely, first, when an armed attack against Japan has occurred, or when an armed attack against a foreign country that is in close relationship with Japan occurs, and as a result, threatens Japan's survival and possesses a clear danger to fundamentally overturn people's right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Secondly, where there is no appropriate means available to repair the attack and ensure Japan's survival and protect its people. And thirdly, use of force to the minimum extent necessary. Counter-strike capabilities therefore fall within the purview of Japan's constitution and international law. They do not change Japan's exclusively defense-oriented policy. From a strategic communications perspective, there is an inherent ambiguity in the concept of counter-strike that couches on distinction between and the balance between defense and deterrence by denial. Successful deterrence would require both the capability and credible communications, hence how to communicate Japan's will and capabilities for deterrence will remain a challenge for the time being. That's all.
Thank you very much. And you just mentioned the constraints posed by Japanese constitution, and I would take that opportunity, that input, to go to my colleague Bakowski and ask him, why don't you? How should we conceive this tension between the Japanese pacifist constitutional pacifism, as I would more likely describe, and what's the how do we explain the tension between the pacifist constitution and this increase in the defense budget and this renewed posture of Japanese defense?
Okay, benissimo. Thank you very much, Guido. But also, first of all, thank you to our ISPI colleagues for having organized all of this, because we're sitting here for an hour and we have all the nice job, but they have been organizing this and putting up the logistics, which is always very fundamental. So thank you very much for this. On a less, on a more serious note, first of all, to the audience, I think we have to appreciate the fact that what happened in Japan in 2022, and I'll come back to the Constitution, is fundamental. You know, these are fundamental, if you will, radical changes. You know, the country is going to be spending, for now, 65% more on defense than before. It's got to be, could be more, but Japan could be, by the end of 2027, could be doubling its defense budget. Okay, and that's you know, from $50 billion to $100 billion. Okay, these are fundamental changes, and which they will, and until what extent they will clash with the pacifist constitution remains to be seen. But I think we need to appreciate the level of radical transformation. You know, sure, like Chiyuki said, the defense doctrine is going to be the same. You know, Japan is not going to be attacking anybody. Japan is not will not become a militarist, imperialist power, anything like this. Japan will be equipping itself to defend itself against we know whom. So, but still, 65% is a lot, and this will. And again, to put this into perspective and to put some numbers to it, Japan is now, the world's 8th largest spender on defense. So 7 countries in the world spend more on defense than Japan. If this goes ahead as planned, and when by 2027 all is said and done, Japan will be number 3 in the world in terms of defense expenses. This is a lot of money. So Japan will be, there will be only 2 countries spending more on defense. That's the US and China. Okay, and so Japan will be, if this goes ahead as we have been told it would be going ahead, then Japan is a military power to reckon with. Okay. And then we go back to the constitution. Japan, as we know, has a pacifist constitution, just like Italy. You know, we have an article in Japan's constitution which does not allow Japan to have armed forces. Does Japan have armed forces? No, it has self-defense forces. Okay, Jietai, self-defense forces. So Japan is continuing. This is an ongoing discussion. Japan, when you ask students in Japan and you ask them, so does Japan have armed forces, they would say, no, we have self-defense forces. Okay, so we do not violate the Japanese constitution. But you have self-defense forces spending a lot of money, and will be spending double that in a couple of years. Right. First, and so there is naturally a clash with the pacifist constitution. There is a debate in Japan on this, and I'm sure my Japanese colleagues will be able to add more on this, and also later today. I have the feeling that the debate on the controversies of alleged violations on the Japanese constitution, in view of this increase of the defense budget, I think it's very muted. It's very calm. There's there's no real outrage. There's a debate. Yes, it is controversial, but I don't think the public is outraged. I think the public has more or less accepted the fact that Japan needs to upgrade its defense capabilities to be able to defend itself, and not necessarily against North Korea, but against China, because this is about China. Let's be very clear, and we'll talk about this a little bit later. So the Japanese constitution is a pacifist constitution, but what is happening in 2021, is a long way coming. Look back into Japan, 2014. Japan has been reinterpreting its constitution, allowing itself to execute the right to collective self-defense. Fundamental reinterpretation of the constitution. Until 2014, Japan said, no, we cannot take part in multilateral military missions which require the country to execute the right to collective self-defense, because we are a pacifist country. That has gone out of the window a long time ago. What is happening in 2021, is going further. Right? And what is even, and Chiyuki said this earlier, what is also fundamentally important and fundamentally radical, if you will, Japan, a pacifist country which does not allow itself to have armed forces, is going to be deploying offensive Tomahawk missiles, which they will be buying, which the government will be buying from the US. And there's also certainly ambitions to produce them at home. But for now, they're going to be buying those Tomahawk missiles from the US. And the Tomahawk missiles will be able to hit North Korean nuclear missile sites. They will be able to hit, in theory, not in practice, I hope, will be able to hit, China, the eastern coast of China. So this is fundamental. A pacifist country, okay, is deploying offensive ballistic missiles, which are able to hit, targets outside of Japan, right? Certainly creating constitutional debate in Japan, but not, at least in my view, and our colleagues will come back to this later, I suppose, not in the way you would be expecting this from a country that is on paper still a pacifist country. Yes, it is in violation of Article 9. There's lots of arguments for this. But on the other hand, it's not. There's even a discourse that comes up, and that's the last thing I'll be saying. There's even a discourse in Japan that is coming up every once in a while for a number of years, not going anywhere, not going to be implemented. But there are people in Japan who say, look, Japan is a pacifist country, but Japan, has the right, at least in theory, to deploy nuclear weapons, for the purpose of self-defense. This discourse is coming up every once in a while. Not going to happen, at least not on the current government's watch for sure. But despite being a pacifist country, a country, for the purpose of self-defense, for what the self-defense forces were established in 1954, would have the right to even deploy nuclear weapons. So it's not a big deal, to have offensive missiles. It's not a big deal to be spending, to double the defense budget. It's an ongoing story, but I don't think, but I stand to be corrected, of course, I don't think that the constitutional controversies or the debate among academics and the debate among scholars is going to have an impact on what Japan will be doing in terms of defense over the last 4 to 5 years. Grazie.
Thank you, Axel. And you two just mentioned two very important things. On one hand, there is the increase in military spending, and on the other are the new military capabilities. That, of course, means a lot of weapons. And so I'm going to address Ms. Pajon now and ask her, where is the place, what is the place of Japanese defense industry in this? Because we know Japan has a very strong industrial base with a strong focus on defense. So I'm asking, where is the place for Japanese defense industry in this security overhaul?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Guido. Thank you to the organizer for having me to this very good conference. So to respond to your comment, indeed, Axel just mentioned the Tomahawk. And just to remind that Japan is really dependent on the US defense industry for its weapons. And in the next years, Japan will buy a bit less than 150 F-35 fighter jets. So this is really huge. So what about the domestic defense industry? I think back in December, the government decided to support strongly its industrial base, to invest around $315 billion over the next 4 years. This means that for the government, a healthy or viable defense industry is really seen as a key deterrent for the country. And actually, it is much needed because you said that the Japanese defense industrial base is strong, but I would maybe qualify what you say. Actually, the defense industry in Japan is very much constrained and still not profitable, I would say. And this is for two main reasons. First, because in Japan there is no big player specializing 100% on defense industry. You will have conglomerates that everybody knows, like Daikin, Mitsubishi, Hitachi, and so on, are producing consumer goods and have only very small units specializing in defense industry, defense equipment. So generally, it's not more than 10% of the whole activity of the company. So this creates a kind of reputational issue for the Japanese industry, because it's still not so popular in Japan to produce armaments, so it's difficult for this company to really publicize what they are doing. The second reason is that these industries are restricted by the size of their market. Basically, the size of their market is Japan. Because back in the 60s, the Japanese government adopted a ban on export of defense equipment abroad, which means that the defense industry is working for the self-defense forces, and at some point also with very clear limitation in cooperation with the US, especially when Japan is building his ballistic missile defense. So it's very difficult, you will understand, for this industry to make profit and to be competitive. So I have to say that the ban on the arms export was lifted in 2014 as part of the defense reform implemented by the Prime Minister Abe. And this ban was replaced by the 3 principles on transfer of defense equipment and technology. So this means that Japan can now transfer some equipment, but also with conditions and limitations. But still, it's very important. Still, Japan is a latecomer in the international defense market, and it has difficulties to enter it and really expand its activity on its market. And one big disappointment, I remember that very well because I was in Tokyo at that time, in 2016, when Australia decided to renew, to build on its submarine fleet, it decided to choose the French option rather than the Japanese one, and this was really a big shock for Japan. And of course, some times ago, it was a big disappointment for France when Australia decided to go nuclear on the nuclear option. An important support was really needed from the government to be able to salvage this defense industrial basis. So it's really a matter of survival, I would say, and sustainability. So how to do that? The government designed several ways to boost the competitiveness of the industry. First, they decided to facilitate the administrative procedures for procurement, which is usually cumbersome in every country, but in Japan particularly. Second, to boost innovation by breaking the silos, breaking the stovepipe as much as possible, especially between the civilian technology, industry, R&D, and the military and defense industry and research. And also make the industry adopt international standards when they design their equipment to be able to sell to close partners, so for interoperability purpose, but also to go broadly in the world. And especially on the issue of info sharing and security clearance and so on, some initiatives have been taken already. And this is to say that international partnerships are really key for Japan to advance on the international market and to keep its industry viable and competitive. So I think we will likely to see more joint development projects like the Tempest program that Japan launched with Italia and the UK for a next generation fighter jet. Maybe tomorrow we will see Japan joining AUKUS, at least the pillar 2 of AUKUS, which is about innovation in defense technology. Why not? It would be logical. So I'm wrapping up now. What's the way ahead? I think that Japan is going to further relax these three principles to be able to export more easily finished weapon, or to be able to more quickly transfer armament to allies when they are attacked, and so on. And I will end with a question, which is such a big public subvention to defense industry sustainable? That's an open question for my Japanese friend. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pajon. And I will take your input now and pass the word to Ms. Panda, because you just mentioned international partnerships. Japan has international partnership, which sometimes is named like an alliance with the US, for instance. And so far, legal constraints are still in place to what the Japanese self-defense forces can do, also in the framework of this alliance, which remains the pillar of Japan defense to this day. But does this defense reform change this outlook? What do you think?
Thank you, Guido. Pleasure to be here, and let me thank all my ISP friends, particularly Filippo, Axel, Paola, and all the ISP friends. And I think my institute, ISDP, is a partner with ISP and IFRI, so I really feel happy about this. I think your question is very interesting in response to all other panelists. I think there are three aspects in particular what we should look at. One is that I think when we're talking about the defense reforms in Japan, it's not really happening in isolation. It's happening in response to something. And the Japanese way of reforming the defense are conditioned by three factors: geographic, territorial, and cyber. And I think these three factors heavily shape Japan's defense reforms. Geographic, primarily because Japan wants to still remain the most significant influencing power in East Asian regions. And I think that has been threatened by rise of China, by China's defense modernization program, China's maritime posturing. Second is that the protection endeavor that Japan wants to really bring in its reforms. Protection about the Senkaku Island region, the dispute it has got with China. And I think that's much more territorial in nature. And these are the two main factors. Apart from that, what has really emerged in last 1 decade or so is the cyber perception, the cyber threat, which has been the most significant aspect in Japan's defense reforms. That's primarily because of the North Korea, because of the security calculus that North Korea is developing with Russia and with China. That has significantly encouraged Japan to look at the reforms. And therefore, the Japanese have been quite vocal, quite categorical about how to overcome that constraint. Now, there are two constraints are there. One is the constraint which is imposed by the constitution. The other constraint is more by Japan as a nation, as a society. And I think the constitutional constraint is partly being overcome through different initiatives, though there is no immediate overcome to that constitutional restraint. It might take many more years. And I think the late Prime Minister Abe Shinzo started it, and I think Kishida is carrying forward it, but there is no easy way out about the constitutional revision. But the second one is the most significant one that we should not really overlook. I think there has not been any time over the last 2 decades or so, the Japanese society across all the political and strategic community has been so unanimously agreed to the fact that Japan needs a serious defense reforms. And I think that has actually been outstanding. Now, coming to the categorical part of your question, I think what we are seeing currently in Japan is a radical revisionism. This is what I have been writing about China over the last 1 decade or so when I was in Delhi. My observation about China's defense reforms and Japan's defense reforms, I draw a parallel, but in contrast. One parallel is that there are revisionism in both the countries are taking place, in China as well as in Japan. But in China, what we have seen, we saw a radical defense as well as radical economic reforms in China over the last 2 decades. But in Japan, we always saw the radical reforms and revisionism in the economic domains. Only in last few years we are seeing it in the defense thing. So therefore, Japan's defense reforms are much more conditional, geographic, territorial, and cyber-oriented. The second fact is about the self-defense forces that you mentioned. And I think this is a critical dimension because the way the future outlook of Japan is emerging, particularly in the defense and security sector, that is really going to strengthen the alliance framework in the regions, particularly as Celine and others pointed out, the kind of chemistry Japan is having with the US, and the kind of self-defense force joint command is being planned in 2024. That will have a lasting impact. And this is a structural reform happening given the limitations Japan was having, not only in terms of constitution, but also in terms of operational practice. What we have seen so far is that I think Japan's self-defense forces was always being governed by the Chief of Defense Staff. But I think with the self-defense forces joint command introduced in 2024, we'll see a special officer is being appointed who would actually be working under or actually reporting to the defense chief of staff. And that's a significant change because this is where the Japan is making a progressive structural and defense reforms, keeping in mind that China carried out a massive structural reforms in the defense commands and the commands regions in 2016. My last point is that how do we see that Japan is going to change in terms of operational tactics, in terms of structural reforms, and in terms of response pattern? I think there are 3 priorities areas they are focusing. And there, not only the relationship with the US matters, but also Japan's future relationship with India and with the Quad countries will also matter. With India, of course, there is nothing much in terms of defense collaboration has happened, but there are a lot of security understanding is happening between Japan and India. And I think there are 3 particular priorities areas that Japan is focusing, and there are a lot going to happen between Japan and the allied countries in Indo-Pacific. One, and I think the command and control system. There what we are seeing, the SDF, the self-defense forces, is focusing a lot on the command and control capability system. Second one is the strike capability. And this is where the Japanese are making a change, even though there are constitutional limitations, Article 9, there are societal taboo, not being a nuclear power or not going for a nuclear power. But what we are changing, what we are witnessing the change is the structural reforms, the defense reforms that Japan is bringing in terms of strike capability, the first strike capability. The third is, I think, the readiness. Then what is outstanding about the Japan's defense reforms, and there what you were mentioning about the budget growth and all, we could link it with the budget growth and the defense reforms plan, is Japan's readiness. And I think for a long time, Japanese society and the strategic makers, policy makers, they are feeling constrained that probably Japan is not ready to go for that response which will require a massive response, not only just to face China or not only to face North Korea singularly, but also to face in combination of an alliance. And I think that is where the Japanese defense reforms is making a change. And the alliance they are preparing is a China, North Korea, Russia kind of trilateral alliance. And I think this is most astounding aspect about Japan's defense reforms that we are witnessing.
And that fits perfect with my intention to now broaden the discussion to the wider, like international scenarios where the Japanese defense reform is taking place. And for that, I would like to address first Mr. Berkowski, and I want to ask you how would you characterize the geopolitical scenario where Japan is rearming itself? What are the external threats that you already mentioned before, but now you have to deliver on explaining them?
Okay. Grazie, Mr. Casanova. I call you Guido. I'm not a diplomat, okay? Non sono diplomatico, e poi ora capite perché. It's yes. Hello. It's you again. Hi. How are you? You always come. It's about China. Okay, this is about China. This is not about North Korea. Okay, there would be no defense reforms. There would be no Quad. There would be no, collaboration with India on defense if it were not for China, you know. And it's nothing, I'm not an ideologue, I'm not a politician, I don't care about ideology in this context, so I'm not an enemy of China or anything like this, but as a scholar, as an analyst, or as a historian, I look to the facts on the ground, okay? And why is Japan equipping itself with the capabilities to defend itself better, including, you know, the capability to preemptively or preventively attack some, you know, other countries, or, you know, Korea and North Korea in principle, is because, you know, it's because of China. What China is doing, okay, on the ground, okay? And this is, of course, certainly my favorite topic. But you look at the facts on the ground. What is China doing on the ground? What is China doing in the South China Sea? And again, no ideology, no China bashing. China is expanding its territories in the South China Sea. China is building military bases on disputed islands in the South China Sea. For what? You know, for defensive purposes? I'm not so sure, okay? China is threatening Japanese territorial integrity in the East China Sea, the Senkaku Islands, you know. China is changing the territorial status quo on the ground, or is attempting to do this. China is threatening Taiwan militarily, taking place every day. You know, I don't know how many intrusions into Taiwanese controlled airspace are taking place on a daily basis, but they are taking place. So these are indications that China is, you know, is up to something. You know, this is about you know, China being a threat. It's not about North Korea launching a missile, you know, towards Japan or South Korea or anywhere else. I mean, you know, sure, they have missile capabilities and they are making progress, and, you know, they have a nuclear program, but I don't think that the North Korean regime is stupid enough to attempt, you know, attacking Japan or South Korea militarily, knowing that this would lead to the complete destruction of the Korean Peninsula within a couple of days. So this is not about North Korea. This is not about anybody else. It's about China. And again, it's because of the facts on the ground. It's about military deterrence / military containment. We are back to military containment. Maybe we never left military containment, you know, and look at what is going on in Russia. If you don't contain, you know, an autocratic dictatorship, you at some point pay the bill, okay? And this is something that the Japanese government or Japan, with you know, like-minded democracies, with North Korea, with the Philippines, with Vietnam, with India, with the US, of course, above all, is trying to do. So this is about China. There would be no defense reforms. There would be no Quad. There would be no fantasizing about deploying nuclear weapons in Japan if it were not for China. I think this is very, very clear. And I think, again, it's not about, you know, being unfriendly to China, but it's about the policies on the ground over the last 10 years under Xi Jinping, and there has been a dramatic change in quality. And so this is basically the very clear-cut and very simple answer. It's not about North Korea, but it's about China. And that's not a surprise. Grazie.
So we've talked where does this defense reform comes from, but now I want to ask to Ms. Aoi, where does this defense is heading? Where is this defense heading for? What is the strategic outlook that Japan, that's underpinning Japan defense reform? What is the world in maybe 10 years' time, 15 years' time that Japan is seeing down the line, and this defense reform is preparing it for it? What you think of that?
Okay, right. I mean, I don't disagree with the overwhelming, you know, majority opinion that everything Japan does in terms of defense is always, you know, there is something to do with China. I don't disagree entirely with that, but my own take is to take it a little more at the strategic level and over the long term and in a more comprehensive manner. So there is definitely a constructive element to Japanese foreign policy and defense policy. That's what I understand. The most immediate trigger of the last defense reform, indeed, was the very rapid evolution shift in the strategic environment in that part of the world, and namely the rapid development of DPRK technological kind of advancement in terms of weapons development. And even more so, as Axel said, I mean, it is about China, whose activity in South China Sea and East China Sea is continuing rather aggressively, etc. And also the impact of Russia's action in Ukraine has been huge, I think, in Japan. We have seen such a change, I think, on, for example, including public opinion that supports Japan's support with G7 extended to Ukraine. And Japan was very, very quick pointing out how Russia's action in Ukraine was a complete breach of international law. It's against rules-based order. So Japan has a very long-term and very strong interest in maintaining rules-based order. And that, of course, is, with the elements of self-defense, self-interest, given the fact that Japan merited and Japan was always in an advantageous position when the Indo-Pacific was, very much liberal, open space where United States power was dominant. But that condition has somewhat altered. So all those motivates Japan, and there is definitely a constructive element in Japanese foreign policy and defense policy, which need to be understood together with all these on-the-ground development of weaponry and technical capabilities. To my view, it is very important to therefore point out the first purpose of the Japanese defense, which is to shape the international environment. Current defense document is, understandably focused on deterrence. But the version before it, the National Defense Program Guideline of 2018, for the first time, made the creation of international environment the first defense purpose. Japan always talked about creation of international environment when Japan, for example, sent peacekeepers, yes? The faraway threat in Africa, for example, is prevented from coming, a threat that's really near you. That was the context in which international environment was always discussed. But since 2018, Japan's defense purpose actually reconfigured that to a very much more imminent interest that Japan is shaping the event around, especially focused on Indo-Pacific, and that was made the first purpose of defense. And then this time, there's more naturally more focus on deterrence. However, this constructivist definition of Japanese defense purpose, which first purpose of Japanese defense is, it's by shaping, it's significant. To me, that's an exercise of strategic communications, because strategic communications shapes the international relations and international order. So having said that, I think it's really important to understand Japanese defense is moving together with Japanese foreign policy, whose most primary pillar is the idea of free and open Indo-Pacific. And at the strategic level, Japan's vision is to keep the Indo-Pacific free and open. That's very different from stable and prosperous. It needs to be maintained free and open. So Japan's vision is very much that, and that is the Japan's long-term vision. So with that, I think I conclude my remark.
Thank you. And now I will address Mr. Panda, because Japan rearmaments has, of course, raised concern in Asia. Some concern, of course, because Japan has a kind of also difficult past. And so I want to go back to you and ask, what do you see as what do you think of the reaction and the views of Asia to the change in Japanese defense posture?
So in order to understand the response of Asia towards Japan, I think it is also equally important how Japan is looking at Asia. First, we need to understand the way Japan has looked over the last one decade or last couple of decades towards Asia. Japan has looked Asia more as an Asia plus construct, that is the Indo-Pacific construct. And there, I think 2 or 3 issues has mattered most for Japan. One is, of course, the Senkaku Island dispute. Second one is the South China Sea dispute. The third one is, I think, the Taiwan crisis. And I think Japan is reorienting itself to face the Taiwan crisis more than probably any other issue, because Taiwan occupied by China would expose the Japanese security. Interestingly, many Asian countries' outlooks on Japan is also changing, including that of India. And I think here keeping the constraint of the time, I would not go into the details of the Asian countries' response. But for the first time, what we are seeing, and I think there is a change that has happened since the time Chinese President Xi Jinping has talked about Asia is for Asians. And I think there most of the Asian countries has differed with the Chinese President Xi Jinping. And they have said Asia is not only for Asians. Asia is also for the wider international communities. And their Asian countries, mainstream Asian countries, be it ASEAN countries, be it India, be it Japan, including South Korea, we have welcomed the presence of the United States of America as a more critical power there. And also we have welcomed the European presence. And that's why today, when we are talking about EU having an Indo-Pacific strategy, is very much possible because countries like India and Japan has welcomed the EU's Indo-Pacific strategy. Unless countries like India and Japan have welcomed EU's Indo-Pacific strategy, EU cannot really think about having that constructive engagement with Asia or Asia plus countries. And I think there, the Asian response is becoming much more categorical, that Japan as a country needs to be on the front line, and therefore you will see today there is almost every month a key meeting is happening between India and Japanese leaders, either at the ministerial level, at the national security advisor level, at the prime ministerial level. I mean, India-Japan relationship partnership is one of those partnerships in the regions which is having continuously leadership level annual dialogue for last more than one and a half decade. And that's a significant development. So the Asians' response is becoming very much China-centric, and therefore there Japan is having a much more collaborative efforts with India and the Quad countries. In response to that, when it comes to India, I think India is also looking at Japan in a new context, in a new prism. And I think earlier India would like to only see Japan as an economic partner. But there is a significant change has happened, and I think much of this credit goes to the late Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who actually put India into the Japan's strategic horizon as one of the top Asia partner. And today we could see that India's partnership with Japan is becoming comprehensive and multidimensional. It was only economic dimension where Japan was having a constructive engagement with India. But today we are talking in the critical security domains, cyber security, science and technology, space collaborations, a number of areas emerging. Of course, on the defense area, probably India is not one of those defense, top ranked defense collaborating country with Japan. But then I think there is a beginning that's happened. Most interestingly, and I think Japan has also brought the Quad countries not only under a united umbrella, but also built that Asia plus construct minus China. And I think therefore, I think Asian countries' outlooks not only on Japan, but also on China is rapidly changing. Japan is emerging as a critical partner. China is emerging as a critical security threat for most of the Asian countries in times to come.
Thank you. And we wouldn't be talking about an Asia-Europe initiative if we were not talking about also a European view on the Japanese changing defense policy. What do you make of that, Pajon?
Well, I think there is warm welcome from European countries regarding what's going on in Japan on defense capabilities, especially since the war in Ukraine. I think the war in Ukraine has been a shock for the Europeans, but also for the Japanese, and it was key to move ahead the Japanese public opinion and to make them realize that, the war is actually much more tangible now. So there is this very famous phrase from Prime Minister Kishida, Ukraine today could be East Asia tomorrow. So I think it means a lot. So Japan with greater defense capability is a more capable partner for Europe, for Europeans. We've seen that through the rapprochement between Japan and NATO, for example. And also this summer, the latest EU-Japan summit was very much focused on security cooperation too. So there have been a strategic dialogue was launched for the first time, and also some decision to boost the naval exercise between us. Also at the bilateral level, Japan is also expanding its exercise with European countries, and I'm thinking right now, I think it just ended. For the first time, the Japanese ground defense forces have been exercised with the French forces in New Caledonia in the Pacific. So that's the first. The defense cooperation started with the maritime, naval capacity, air capacity, and now to the ground capacity. So yeah, I think a lot of understanding, a lot of also opportunity for Japan to make the European be more aware of the tensions in the Taiwan Straits by making some comparison with the Ukraine. It's difficult to make comparison, but still it's really striking. When you think about the risk of upcoming conflict in Europe and Asia. Yeah.
Thank you. Now we have maybe 5 minutes for a question from the public. There is. Wait a second, there is a microphone coming. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, really thankful to be here, since it's always a pleasure getting to see some different broader views when it comes to the Japanese and broader Asian area. As a former expert and as a researcher for almost 5 years in Japan, then I came back here in Italy. I have a question which regards mostly how Japan intends to actually improve its research and budget when it comes to defense. Because on one side, it's my opinion that one thing would be spending money, and the other one, it's getting results when it comes to that. There's also an issue which pertains to the reliance that the Japanese government has on the Americans and the USA, as we can see in the Okinawa-based case. And given the fact that Japan has now the century-long problems of Koreika, so when population is getting older and the enlistment rate for the GTI, it's still low, it's not a high percentage. What would be the strategy for the Japanese government to implement some kind of strategy to close the gap and then to get some results, and I'm talking probably really important results, in order to bridge the gap that it has when it comes to its own defensive capabilities?
Is it addressed to any...
To any member on the panel, thank you.
Someone wants to take this?
Generally, research is challenging for Japan's universities and research community in general. So I take your question with a grain of salt, I mean, to be honest. And also recruitment issue has to do with the justification of how force is going to be justified within the society. And I suspect that might transform, or perhaps there is a need to put greater emphasis on how to explain the Japan's defense forces roles evolving, and also how those will touch upon the technological aspects, etc. So I think those issues are actually still the work in progress, to my view. So other people have more.
Sure. Okay, I think you're also asking about what's going on. You spend all this money, so what is the result? Okay, I mean, Japan is cooperating a lot. Japanese defense contractors, Mitsubishi, Sumitomo, Kawasaki, Heavy Steel, these are all multinational big corporations who could not, for them, this could not have taken place a day earlier. They have been for years waiting for this to happen. And they are cooperating with not only American defense contractors, but also with Europeans. They are cooperating with Leonardo in Italy. I mean, you know, on development of a stealth fighter of the latest generation, and with the Brits. So there is a lot of expertise in Japan. There's a lot of willingness also to make money, to make money, because this is a very expensive business. But if you collaborate with others, it becomes you know, less expensive, and you exchange technologies. So there's a lot of expertise in Japan on this already, and a lot of willingness to you know, to cut itself, if you will, you know, a piece of the global weapons procurement system. So there's a lot going on the ground with India also, and maybe one day even with South Korea, despite all the, you know, historical animosities. But Japan is spending its money very well, you know, and since the big defense contractors have been given the go-ahead with a lot of restrictions, as Celine pointed out, and also as Chiyuki pointed out, you know, to cooperate with global weapons contractors. You know, the big corporations in Japan have been jumping on the train very, very quickly with the Germans, with the Brits, with the Indians, with everybody. So I think you can expect, you know, some results. Japan is very smart at spending money, you know, wisely, and this is, I think, this is what is taking place. So it's not going to be some money, you know, you throw money at the problem. This is probably well invested capital, which will, you know, help not only to defend Japan against China or North Korea or against anybody else, but it's also, you know, a big deal for Japan's, you know, weapons procurement companies.
Can I add very shortly to add? I think that's a important point what Axel raised. I think if we see a few years back, Japan was not very open to the idea of having co-production with non-alliance countries, that is outside the US framework. But today I think Japan is thinking about co-production and burden sharing elements. And I think that is one of the important elements what we'll see, that if they have announced for 2% you know, hike, 2% of GDP in the next 5 to 10 years in the defense budget, I think that's a significant number. But one of the critical component of that number would be to enter into joint collaboration or co-production, probably outside the US system for the first time we'll see. But before that, both Japan and the partnering countries would make it sure that this is very much in the defense and critical domain area. But we will see that probably Japan entering into a zone where outside US or outside alliance framework, Japan would be collaborating with countries like India and possibly with many countries including Israel and all. So this is one critical aspect which will be. And also in other, what we are getting the impression from the official documents and from the official articulation of Japan's defense strategy to a revision of the national security strategy is also Japan is going to constrain the expenditure in many other areas. It's not only about constraining but also investing in the right area. So we will see a lot of cutting in the budget in many areas and also invest in the right areas, including in the defense and security areas. So a lot of reallocation of the budget would also be taken care of in the next 4 to 5 years.
We all know that Japan and Russia are still technically in a status of war, and this is due to the disputed islands that are considered by Japan as northern territories and by Russia as Kuril Islands. So how the war in Ukraine, the special military operation, could change the relevance of this area and the needs of defense of Japan? Thank you.
Yeah, I think that the war in Ukraine was the occasion for Japan to break with the Abe era in a way, because under Prime Minister Abe was very fond of reaching out to Vladimir Putin to try to make a peace deal and to make a deal over the disputed island. So he made a lot of effort, he met him a lot of times. He promised a lot of economic investment and so on, but with absolutely no result, no positive results. So after Abe, this policy started to be criticized, and the war in Ukraine was the occasion to say, well, we really neatly break with this approach, and we consider Russia not as a friendly country anymore, but a country who is a security concern. And this was reinforced by the several joint patrol that Russia conducted with China all around the Japan archipelago. So this really was raised a sense of alarm about a possible, common front of Sino-Russia to oppose Japan and to try to coordinate to put more pressure on Japanese forces with repeated incursion in the air and maritime territory. So Japan is still looking at this with very strong concern, and Japan is indeed in a very uncomfortable situation right now because it is facing potentially 3 fronts with 3 nuclear power. So that's also explaining why it is investing so much in its defense right now.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your attention. We need to close this panel for now. I want to thank Axel, Celine, Chiyuki, and Jagannath, and thank you very much for your attention. Now we'll leave the floor for the next panel. Thank you very much.
So the second session is about to start, so please stay with us, especially because I think what you are going to say right now is very interesting, because actually some of the questions coming from the audience are some of the questions we are about to give an answer to now in this second session. So thank you again for being here, and thank you for our guest today. Let's start with Ken Jimbo, professor, Keio University, Japan. Alice Ekman, senior analyst, European Union Institute for Security Studies from Belgium, but even if she's French. Pramesha Shah, research fellow from Observer Research Foundation, ORF, from India. And Chen Ding, professor of international relations from Jinan University in China. So thank you very much for being here with us. So in the previous session, we focused especially on
the dimension of reform in the defense sector in Japan. But the title of this conference here today is Defense is Back. So not only in Japan, but defense is back in the international debate. We know, and we're going to talk about that, that many more countries are focusing, spending a lot of efforts on security issues. And of course, one of the main reasons for that is the war in Ukraine. So let's start with Ken Jimbo. My question is actually the last question we had in the previous session. What is, from your point of view, what is the strategic meaning for Japan of the war in Ukraine?
Well, thank you very much, and very happy to be here in Milan, and thanks ISBI for inviting me. And I think that you mentioned about Russian invasion in Ukraine has a direct impact on today's subject on the defense is back. But I think that the whole trend of changing dynamics of the balance of power in the world has been going on for several decades already. So there's no unipolar moment by the United States that really, covered the whole deterrent structure of the world, both in the trans-Pacific and trans-Atlantic relationship, because that emerging powers are emerging, and there is no such things about preponderant U.S. Deterrent structure in both regions, where China poses the anti-access area denial capability for not letting United States do free access to the vicinity of China, and also as a Russia, Iran, and many of those new actors has to be taken into account. And I think that the Russian invasion of Ukraine had a final blow in that the creating our awareness to reconfigure the deterrent structure once again. And this is, I think, quite important, because something that we also need to recognize that we failed in deterring Russia in Ukraine. And could we say that if we failed in Asia in deterring China invading Taiwan and any other places? And that could be some plausible scenario that we really need to reformulate the structure of deterrence. And why we fail deterrence in Ukraine, we analyze so many things, strategic, I think signaling has been failed, and I think that all the kind of capabilities to, resist and respond to the, Russian invasion have failed. We all know that Putin had made a historical mistake, and his strategic calculation has been, it's bad. But I think that we failed in, sending that those kind of sequence that might happen, that your invasion will be unsuccessful, and that was not in this case that we have sent a message in prior to the invasion, and that was, I think, at the basic failure of the deterrence. So the basic lesson that we have learned, how we really reflect those kind of lessons in Asia, is one that we have already spoken in the previous session. We adopted the strategy in order to deny the Chinese prospect of the operational success in major scenario that they face. We are doubling the budget, as many mentioned, but we are not trying to match up the material capability with China, because China is, way skyrocketed high on the capability. We are not matching up our own capability with China. We are still inferior. We, in fact, constantly inferior to China. But what is the defense reform is all about? It is about the capability to deny the Chinese prospect of the operational success. Why we need a long-range strike capability? We are not going to strike the missiles. We are striking the ships. Whenever that the China tried to, have an amphibious vessel like a full-scale operation towards Taiwan, now that they have to reconsider their strategic calculation that Japan now owns the capability to deny the Chinese to operate in Taiwan. So these are, I think, what we are going to procure in order to at least confuse the Chinese calculation and in order to deny their prospects. Those are, I think, the major lesson that we have learned.
Thank you. So actually, there are some lessons for Japan, for Asia, from what is happening in Europe. So now, Ali Segman, I will ask you, they've been published recently a couple of documents, very important documents, one from the European Union, the strategic compass, the other one from NATO strategic concept, and they both focus a lot on Indo-Pacific. And those documents were saying that actually security issues in the Indo-Pacific are very well connected to security issues in Europe, in the Euro-Atlantic space. So how is it possible to say that those two geographical areas are connected in terms of security? There is some lesson we can learn as Europeans from there?
Thank you very much, Filippo, for the invitation to this. The document that you just mentioned was framed.
Microphone is not working.
Okay. All right. Working now? Yep. All right. Okay. So I was saying that the strategic document that Filippo just mentioned, the preparation and the strategic brainstorming of it was anterior, was preceding the war in Ukraine. So the shaping of Indo-Pacific itself is based on the postulate that the two regions are interconnected. Just looking at sea line of communication, maritime security issues, the importance for European Union to maintain and to safeguard free and open line of communication. So I think that the whole, the emergence of the Indo-Pacific concept, the fact that several EU member states adopted it, but also the EU fully endorsed it at supranational level is very important. But this strategic view has, of course, accelerated with the war in Ukraine. Obviously, because I would say, first of all, the key actors, the main actors, see an interconnection. Russia itself, the aggressor, presents its action as a response to so-called NATO expansion, or shaping his aggression in a frame of a very anti-NATO and anti-Western driven perception. Ukraine, the victim of the aggression itself, is reaching out well beyond its border, as we all know, not just for support, but also for understanding that this is not just the territorial issue, but it's much more than that. It's a political issue in a sense that it's about also safeguarding democracies. There is also rivalry between political systems, and this narrative, I think, is more than a narrative. Of course, it's very important to take into account, and we see since the war in Ukraine an acceleration of ongoing coalition forming. Of course, for example, recently with a visit of the leader of North Korea to Russia, with Iranian support to Russia, but also with a continuous China-Russia rapprochement, at least what I see as a China-Russia rapprochement since the beginning of the invasion. Maybe my colleague Chen could elaborate on this, or maybe have different perspective, but what we are seeing is it's a consolidated trade partnership between the two countries, not just in the energy sector, but also other sectors, plus 20% increase in trade volume in 2022 compared to 2021. This has led to less impact, of course, of sanction targeting Russia in different ways. Russia became the first oil provider to China in 2022. Both countries, as Céline mentioned, have conducted joint military exercise, including in Asia. And it is interesting to also notice that both China and Russia are agreeing on a division of labor in which they are not contradicting each other when it comes to their core fundamental interests, or what they see are their core interests. In the joint statement that was released on 4th of February 2022, a few days before the invasion, Taiwan was clearly indicated. There was a few lines on Taiwan stating in substance that basically Russia is in line with China's position, and China so far has not condemned or contradicted any of Russia's position and action since the beginning of the invasion. So the interconnection, I think, is obvious now. It was framed and seen, I think, from in a peaceful perspective, looking at maritime dimension in particular before the war in Ukraine. Now it is, I would say, unfortunately accelerated as a de facto interconnection, because you have a coalition that are consolidating and that are, I think, that are really leading to a polarization of the world that is that is really taking shape. It's really not. I kind of disagree when we talk about multipolarization, etc. The fragmentation of the world is becoming bipolar. Of course, it's not a clear-cut bipolarization, but we see, especially in East Asia and Northeast Asia, countries that are supporting each other on a variety of issues, not just when it comes to the war in Ukraine. Russia and China both put their veto before the summer when it was time to sanction further North Korea. Whatever the issue can take, it seems that some countries, we can pick that some countries will be on the same side, and some others will be on another side. So on one side you have, I would say, consolidation of the alliance system and expansion even of NATO, and on the other side you have informal coalition building, but it's not because it's not set in stone, it's not written in alliance treaty that we should not take this seriously. When we look at joint military exercise, when we look at state-to-state communication, when you look at voting behavior at the UN, you have clearly solidarity forming, if you could say.
Thank you. So you mentioned fragmentation. Fragmentation probably is one of the outcomes of this war. When we think about the outcome of the war, probably from a strategic point of view, India might be seen as a kind of winner of the strategic of this fragmentation. And India is quite interesting from for the point of view of scholars, because India is both part of Quad. India, as said by colleagues before, without India you don't have Indo-Pacific, of course. You cannot have Indo-Pacific without India. But at the same time, India is close again to Russia, is part of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, is even part of this enlargement of BRICS with China itself, even if they are competing probably within BRICS enlargement to be the leader of the Global South. So my question for you, Pramesh Saha. So what security role can play India through its so-called multi-alignment?
I hope I'm audible. Yes, this is working. Thank you to my colleagues at ISPI for this invitation. And I'll straight jump into the question. So what you termed as multi-alignment is what India calls as issue-based partnerships with like-minded countries in the Indo-Pacific. So this question of this principle of entering into these issue-based coalitions or partnerships with countries in the Indo-Pacific is what has been driving India's policy of a free and open Indo-Pacific. Like many countries, like Japan, like EU, India doesn't have a policy paper as such when it comes to defining what its Indo-Pacific priorities are. But there are certain initiatives, there are certain policies, there are certain speeches which in a way goes on to describe or outline what India's approach towards the Indo-Pacific has been. And when we talk of security, so security has a very broad spectrum. India and Indo-Pacific, when we look at it seriously from just the Indo-Pacific spectrum, India's concept of security is two-dimensional here. First is when we look at, say, the Western Indian Ocean region, which is India's immediate neighborhood. There, India's role is very much to be the first responder to any crises which emerges in the region. This goes on to much beyond to what the age-old belief has been that India is a net security provider in the Western Indian Ocean region. When we look at Indo-Pacific, how India's approach has been, especially to its immediate neighborhoods, I'm I know that Indo-Pacific is supposedly to be a continuous, it is from India's definition goes on from the eastern coast of Africa right till the South Pacific. So I'm just taking it into sub-regions. When we define the immediate neighborhood, it has been, as I said, first responder to crises, whether it is related to natural disasters or even during your COVID. You have initiatives like Vaccine Maitri, for instance. In line with that has also been capacity building for its neighbors. That can be through supply of petrol vessels, that can be through training of their military officers, especially naval officers in our naval war colleges in Goa, in Mumbai. So these has been especially India's approach, because the two main policies which are guiding India's Indo-Pacific is SAGAR, which is security and growth for all in the region, and Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, which if one looks at, there are 7 pillars. These mostly focus on the maritime domain, and these look at maritime security, but mostly also look at blue economy, marine resources, research and development, science and tech, and so many other pillars. So that has been, how India is defining its immediate neighborhood. Second would be, we are talking about, Russia's closeness with Russia. In spite of being a part of, initiatives like the Quad, where all the 3 countries, when it came to the Russia-Ukraine war, had a policy, had a stand which was a little different from India's stand. I want to clarify here that India maintained a neutral stand, but it in all platforms very clearly mentioned that war is not, which was supported by India as well, because it was completely conflicting the notion of a rule-based order in the Indo-Pacific. But this also has to do with the fact that, especially with this government, strategic autonomy is a very big feature when it comes to India's foreign policy. So even in being a part of these groupings, it's not like following the Western path or following what the other countries are doing, compromising your own national interests. So India very much is very conscious of its strategic autonomy, of its own national interests. Yes, India is close with Russia, but in the recent times, you will also see that that dependency when it came to Russia being a trusted defense partner, that dependency, there are efforts to wean that dependency away. And that can be seen how the India-US defense cooperation has been strengthening. You can see the signing of all these foundational agreements like BECA, other LEMOA, and so many SISMOA for these kind of foundational agreements being signed with the US. Our defense partnership is growing with countries like France, with Israel, with the Middle East also. Our diplomacy has been strengthening. So there is this effort, defense partnership with Japan. There is this effort to, reduce the dependence from Russia when it comes to military defense partnership. But it will take time. I will be very clear here. It will take time because this is not a very easy thing to do right away. The effort is ongoing, but it will take time. The third aspect is, we are talking about a security role. I think that how India is emerging as a security partner can be seen recently what India is doing in the Eastern Indian Ocean region in the Western Pacific, especially, say, with countries like Southeast Asia, for example, where you can see the recent BrahMos BrahMos deal being signed with the Philippines, India doing a multilateral naval exercise with the ASEAN, co-hosted with Singapore for the very first time. So there are such initiatives which India is taking. This is to champion India's own ambition of becoming a credible defense exporter to its neighboring countries. Even for that, India will be relying on countries like US, Japan, Korea to help boost these capabilities, to help boost these Made in India initiatives as well. So there are many ways in which to see India's Indo-Pacific policy. With regard to the SCO, let me answer that. There is a reason why India is still a part of SCO. We have been talking, I think Jagannath mentioned about Russia, China, a nexus. Being a part of the SCO gives India a very leveraging or a good position in knowing what is going on between the Russia-China axis, for example. It's not possible for a country like India to move away from these initiatives because the Russia-China challenge is very real for India, especially after the 2020 border issue. These initiatives like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, where Russia and China are a part of, gives India a leverage, a ground to be, present to, I won't say prevent, to at least take notice of what is the growing dynamics between the relation of these two countries. So these kind of initiatives are important for India, and that's why it talks about issue-based partnerships to cater to some national issues of national interest or priorities for India when we talk about the Indo-Pacific. So I'll stop here.
Thank you. Actually, quite very interesting. So issue-based approach and very pragmatic approach, I would say. So after Japan, EU, and India, I would move to Chen Yinding. Actually, I think you have a tough job right now because everybody was talking about China, and actually we are seeing that from the point of view of many, part of the surge in defense can be connected to China's rise or China's behavior in very important regions and that. So from your point of view, how do you see the outcome in terms of defense of the war in Ukraine, and how do you see also the surge in defense in Japan, Japanese expenditure and that? So from Chinese point of view, how do you read it?
Thank you, Philip, and thanks ESP for inviting me. We've been doing online discussions before, so it's nice to be here face to face. Well, the two questions you raised, number one about the war in Ukraine, I think first because it's still ongoing, we still don't know the outcome, but looks like the reality is Russia is not going to be, go away, right, anytime, soon, and there has to be some sort of negotiation and sort of agreement between all the sides involved. And well, there was hope that sometime this year there could be some sort of a talk between, but doesn't look like it's happening at the moment, but sooner or later that has to be resolved. And that's for the sake of European security architecture as a whole, because this is a problem, I would say, dating back to 30 years ago when Soviet Union ended. And at least that's part of the issue, if not the majority part of the issue. I think China's position has been, I think, very consistent and very clear from the very beginning. That is, China, in my understanding, okay, the government did not really endorse openly the kind of behavior by Russia, right? Even though it did not openly condemn that either. That's why the approach has been called pro-Russia neutrality, right? It's still neutral in a sense because China had a very good relationship with Ukraine before the war started, and China still has these ongoing discussions with Ukraine. The minister Wang Yi just went to Ukraine, met with Ukrainian officials not too long ago, and China basically talks to both sides, right? If you want to have, in the end, a sort of agreement discussion, you need be able to talk to both sides, not just one side. And currently, I think India has a better position. India can talk to all the sides in the world. India has the best geopolitical position in the world today. So China is less, in that sense, favorable position. So I think it's ongoing, and sooner or later we're going to have to talk to both sides, and China would like to play a role, not a major role maybe, but sort of a mediating role in that process. As for Japan's defense surge, it's kind of interesting because I recall almost 20 years ago when I was still doing my PhD in political science in Chicago, we had this sort of a discussion. So it's like all over again, Japan's, it's mostly about defense spending, right? Japan had been spending maybe less than 1% of the GDP or close to 1%. And even though it pledged to double, and we don't know because it depends on a lot of issues, right? Depends on Japan's economic situation overall, and most importantly, depends on US pressures, because this is, from China's perspective, it's not so much Japan's really 100% self-willingness to do so. It's really because of U.S. pressure. And the U.S. has been doing a very smart job in pressuring or convincing its allies to do more of the sort of a burden to, in my view, not necessarily to contain China, but to slow down China's rise, so on and so forth. So U.S. has been doing a great job in that regard. So it depends on U.S. domestic politics. Next year, everybody knows the presidential election next year, and we don't know who will be the White House host next year. There's a chance that Trump might come back, a nightmare for everybody. Trump-like Republican might win, so we don't know yet. Either way, I mean, the U.S. domestic politics is so divided. I don't think any kind of a U.S. foreign policy is really sustainable in the long run. You see this, flipping every 4 years, basically. So we don't see a very sustainable long-term U.S. strategy. That could change a lot of the things. If Trump got re-elected again, we don't know what would happen to NATO. We don't know what he would do to North Korea again, or this emerging U.S., Japan, South Korea, sort of Asia version of NATO. By the way, I don't think that's happening, but that's the talk currently. So for me, it's not something, for me personally, something major to worry about for China, because China's target has never been Japan, right? If there's any sort of a target, it's the U.S., vice versa. So China doesn't worry about Japan. China worries about the U.S., of course. And so in that regard, even Japan's GDP, the spending reaches to 2% of the GDP. Still, like a professor you just mentioned, China probably spends more than 2%, right? U.S. spends even more. And so I don't think in terms of difference, spending, that's a major concern. And for the constitutional limitation, I think, in my view, we believe the Japanese society is still very powerful in terms of holding back the kind of militaristic tendencies of some circles. I wouldn't say the Japanese government, maybe some circles would like to break that constitution, but I don't think that's likely to happen unless something really dramatic happens, but that's far away from today.
Thank you. I want to take a couple of points from you. The first one is that you say that India is in the best geopolitical position, and the second one, you say that probably U.S. foreign policy or even Western foreign policy is changing quite often. So, or after a few years. So, if this is a reality, and we can agree or not, but it is a good point. I want to ask to Pramesha Saha. So what are the strengths and weaknesses of West India security cooperation? So is a kind of security cooperation is only related to current issue, or it is here to stay? I just want to add one more point. We are used to say that India, from a Western point of view, is, I'm putting simply way, is much better than China because India is a democracy, while China is not. But we are seeing in the news in the last week there is a huge debate about Canadian and Indian relationship, and somebody is questioning even India as democracy. So another question would be, it will be an issue, the democratic role of India in terms of security alliances in the next 5 years, 10 years. So whenever China is, maybe I'm just making it positive, no longer an issue. So what is the real foundation of West and India security cooperation?
With the West, let me start like this. There were some sensitivities in the past in entering into defense partnerships, or I won't use the term alliance because India has not entered into any alliance, or India is not an ally of any country. That still is very much intact when we talk of Indian foreign policy and security policy. With the West, currently, obviously, the defense partnership has been on an upward slide, especially with countries like US, especially with countries like Australia, Japan, the Quad partners, obviously. With US, I mentioned there have been many agreements. We recently also have the ICET. With Australia, we signed the Mutual Logistics Agreement. With Japan, Japan has been an age-old trusted partner for a very, very long time when it comes to all aspects of Indian foreign policy. Aspects, even in terms of infrastructure development, especially in the northeastern part of India. With the West, with US, there has been a lot of progress, and I won't deny that fact. But still, there is obviously some sensitivity when it comes to sharing of information and technology when it comes to sensitive defense equipments and technology. Obviously, we are making great strides in critical and emerging technology, quantum physics, undersea maritime domain awareness, you name it, we are making strides in those areas. But when it comes to sensitive defense, when it comes to critical defense, obviously the sensitivity still exists. That depends a lot on the trust factor. It also depends a lot on how much. But I don't know if that sensitivity will be taken care of in the near future. But at least it is on an upward swing. Second, how this is acting as a positive factor is because obviously, not just because of the Russia-Ukraine war, there had been a long-term realization that there is a need for India to diversify its defense partnership and not just put all its eggs in one basket, which is the Russian basket. The Russia-Ukraine war, you can say, just helped in solidifying that realization. But that realization was there for quite some time. And that's why this diversifying of defense partnership with not just the Quad countries, but other countries in the Indo-Pacific as well. So as I said, the dependence will take a long time, it will take some time to wean away, but at least that step has been taken in that direction that there is a need to diversify your defense partnership. Third is also the realization that even for India to develop its own capabilities of manufacturing within India and also giving shape to its Make in India, it will need the partnership of these other countries as well to help in training, to help in providing that knowledge, that expertise, which will go in helping India to become a manufacturing base in itself. So these realizations are there, and that is what I think the West and India's defense partnership is aiming towards. It is obviously the China factor is there, but also it has to do with India's own global ambition of becoming a credible defense and a security partner in the Indo-Pacific. With regards to India's geopolitical clout, I do agree that India does have a good geopolitical clout when it comes to the Indo-Pacific, because essentially India, besides with China, the territorial dispute, there is no outstanding territorial disputes with any other countries in the Indo-Pacific. Even when you look at Southeast Asia, India has been looked at as a trusted partner. That's why I always say, if the Quad has to increase its engagements with Southeast Asia, it has to use India's diplomatic stand. It has to use what kind of a image India has in Southeast Asia, and then add on to that and grow on its ties with this region or presence in this region. So India, I agree, do have a geopolitical clout and that I think comes from India's presence in all these platforms that we are discussing about. In spite of being a part of these plurilateral initiatives, India has also strongly championed multilateralism. You can see that even before the G20 summit, 2 days before, PM Modi did go to ASEAN and did attend the ASEAN summit, and there was an India-ASEAN summit also which happened during the course of this. So multilateral platforms are also given due importance in spite of India being this flag bearer of plurilateral initiatives and being a part of a lot of plurilateral initiatives which has been existing as a part of the Indo-Pacific domain, in the Indo-Pacific architecture. With regard to democracy, I'm not an expert on Canada in any aspect, but this is an issue which is under investigation, I think. What has been read in the Indian media that this was a report which was given by the Five Eyes Network to Canada, and I recently saw a statement today just from the External Affairs Minister, who is known for giving very clear statements that India is not a part of the Five Eyes, so obviously we don't know what kind of information has been passed on. But with regard to the India-Canada issue, it's not in any way, impacting India's image of democracy at home. That is not happening. When it comes to foreign and security policy, I don't think India's democracy is at a question here. If anything, there is a lot of praise from the Indian youth and also from the Indian constituencies about how this government has dealt with foreign policy. ORF does like a youth survey on India's foreign policy, and there has only been good sentiments which has come across. This is a survey which takes in 5,000 people and all across 21 cities, youth, basically from 18 to 21, that age group. And there has been only positive messaging when it comes to Indian foreign policy. So with regard to the democracy thing, I don't think that will be a debate in the recent times in the global platforms as well, because I think there is this recognition that India is an important partner, not just in the Indo-Pacific, but also in the global platforms. And how India is becoming a leading voice in the South-South cooperation or even in the global South was, I think, very clear with the inclusion of the African Union when it came to the G20. And I think there has been these kind of initiatives of, ensuring the growth of all in the region, at the same time also increasing your influence. There is this realization that you cannot be a dominant power in your immediate neighborhood, so India is also moving away from its big brother policy that it used to practice when it came to South Asia. That there is a need to work with other countries and at the same time ensuring the security and growth for the others in the region as well.
Others in the region, so back to China again. So China is a factor you mentioned. When we are talking about how the rise in defense expenditure in the region might be a reaction to China, but so now, Chen, I want to ask you, what is exactly China doing from your point of view, and especially from the point of view of the strategy of China? So there is a new strategy named Global Security Initiative. It was presented last year, if I'm not wrong. It was last year, so it's not this year or last year. The white paper this year, but was mentioned for the first time last year. Global Security Initiative, that is one of 3 global initiatives. So, what is exactly, if we can say exactly, or at least what can we say about these global security initiatives?
In Chinese culture, nothing is exact, right? It's a little bit of yin and yang, shifting sometimes back and forth. So there are actually 4 initiatives from Chinese government now dating back to the Belt and Road Initiative that was first raised actually 10 years ago, and this year is 10th anniversary of the initiative. And in the last 2 years, there have been 3 more, maybe more in the future. We like big ideas, so to speak. So there is a Global Development Initiative, there is the Global Security Initiative, and there is a Global Civilization Initiative. So altogether, these 4 initiatives, I think, become the core of Chinese approach to global humanity, right? So to President Xi Jinping's slogan to build a common, how do we call it, for the, common, well, the different versions of English translation, because one sounds better, one doesn't sound, share the future, okay, it's more inclusive, right? Future is always exciting, so share the future for the humanity. So you have basically 3 pillars, basically, right? You need development, for sure. That's to fulfill UN's global agenda, what they call it, a sustainable development 2030, 35. So obviously, development is still, according to China, our #1 problem for the global security, because that's the root of lack of security, is because of lack of development. Basically, the pie is not getting bigger, so we have to basically, compete for shrinking pie, economic growth here. And then Global Security Initiative is China's approach, understanding, and the potential solution to the problem. So what is the problem? The biggest problem of global security? Of course, we have traditional understandings of security, right? In war, for example, we are seeing today, we have non-traditional understandings of global security, like climate change and the future of AI, rise of robot killers, so on and so forth. So China's position is we needed to actually look at this from a holistic point of view, not really dividing one issue area from another. So we needed to look at them as a whole and then try to find the root cause of all of this and hopefully provide some ideas and suggestions. It's ongoing, of course, project, and more details will come. But two most really interesting examples, I think surprised everybody, including me. Early this year, China broke the sort of agreement between Iran and Saudi Arabia. That's the first, because China was never this sort of active in the Middle East, right? Middle East is really far away from China. It's American business, never China's business. But this year, for the first time, China did that. And, we don't know, but if China could sometime next year, play a role between Russia and Ukraine, sort of agreement, that's another, example. So I think China's approach is, okay, let's do some contribution to the global peace and security. It's difficult, of course, and China is not really being trusted by many others, but I think it's trying.
Thank you. Actually, this document, the white paper on global security initiative, was kind of umbrella document for a Chinese position paper on the Ukrainian situation. So I want to ask you, Ali Sekman, what should be the Western and, talking about security, even the NATO reaction, NATO stance on this global security initiative? And even if you think are relevant also for security issues of the other two initiatives, the Global Development Initiative and Global Civilization Initiative.
I think not to take too seriously this initiative as they are presented, because as my colleague said, they are first of all labels that have been launched by the government. It's a bit like the Belt and Road Initiative. When it was launched in autumn 2013, it was a concept, and then content has been put behind step by step through the years. Now the only, I would say, material, concrete document we have starting to explain the initiative is this white paper, which is less than 10 pages long, and that has been issued in February. And emphasize a lot on communication, so it's partly a branding of the initiative. So now that with the fact that we are discussing it now, it's partly the result of this high marketing as promoted by the Chinese government. It's not just communication; it is calling for resumption and multiplication of China's supported security forum. So China is planning to refresh or renew existing security forums such as the Xiangshan Forum, but also create new ones in the coming months and years. So this to be followed. So far they have limited influence, but they may change. It's also about increased funding to some regional mechanism, and it's also about training. And I think that training part is the most interesting part of the document. China has announced in this white paper that it is planning to train 5,000 police and military officers in the next 5 years, mainly from developing countries, or so-called Global South. So now China is planning to present itself as an example to follow in terms of military police norms, maintaining domestic stability. Also, it's not about just techniques and know-how. It's also about promoting an alternative vision of security. As you know, in the document that China and Russia jointly released in February 2022, they mentioned the concept of indivisible security that is back again in this document. So China, along with other countries, is planning to promote an alternative vision of security, and that, I think, should be taken seriously in a sense that it can challenge the norms that are dear to the EU or to NATO, can challenge also some parts of international law that is dear to us, and also I think it is again contributing to fragmentation of the world on both sides, but the dynamic of coalition will more and more, I think, be visible on the security side of things. You know, before China, I know training program are just one example among, you know, the model promotion that we can see through different sectors. But before China was providing Ministry of Commerce, China Ministry of Commerce, Chinese government was providing a free training program to engineers, to civil servants, high-level civil servants and cadres of developing countries for, you know, for economic reform, social reform, etc. Now we are moving to military and police training. It's not new, but it's one example of the, you know, of the ambition of China to be not only you know, to reinforce its diplomatic ties, but also to reinforce also its military ties by training, but also through export of military equipment, and China is also progressing on that front. So I think it's important to have this development in mind. It's also important to have one point that my colleague Chen just mentioned is the expression that we were trying to translate. You know, shared future for mankind or for humanity. The fact that China now is trying to propose solution for the world, that it manage it or not, is a point that needs to be taken, because China has international ambition far beyond its regional environment. That is clear, but these ambitions are now normative. And we were surprised, yes, but by the role of China between Iran and Saudi Arabia. I'm not sure China will manage to be a broker between Russia and Ukraine. I mean, I understand the point that China tried to talk to both sides, but China was very late in taking Zelensky on the phone, more than 1 year after the invasion of Ukraine, and China is still a very important partner of Russia. I don't see much of a distanciation between China and Russia. I don't see any sign of evolution of the relationship. Russia is considered as the most important strategic partner for China to date. Contradict me if I'm wrong, but that's what the authorities keep repeating. And on that basis, I'm not sure it can position itself as a mediator, but we never know, of course.
So a good part of those initiatives is narratives. So I want to ask you, Ken Jimbo, what about NATO and Japan cooperation? Is the same time, it's a provocative question, a way to shape narrative, or is anything concrete?
Sure. I think that there has been encouraging history about the Japan-NATO relationship back in 2005 and 2006, when Prime Minister Abe was the first term of the administration who have encouraged the evolutions of the Japan-NATO relationship. During that time, NATO was looking at like a global response operations, NATO responsive forces, how to deal with the EU to, divide the, the issues between them. But I think has changed dramatically in 2010. Europe has been quite busy with all the problems associated within Europe, reassertiveness of Russia, Syria, internal terrorism issues all around the things. And we are also busy with China, Russia, and North Korea. So in that context, what are the new kind of dynamics of the Japan-NATO relationship? And I think that relates to what previous speaker mentioned about Prime Minister Kishida's mentioning about today's Ukraine will be tomorrow's East Asia. That is the indivisibility of the two strategic theater in transatlantic and also Indo-Pacific. First of all, that is a conceptual manner. What is happening in the in the logic of the failure of deterrence could happen in East Asia. So let's cross-referencing of what the response has been doing in each end of the region. And secondly, we also need to cultivate practical cooperation between each other. And I think in recent 10 years there has been a more European forces presence in Indo-Pacific. Europe also have adopted its own Indo-Pacific strategy as a kind of gravity concept to engage in the region, not only conceptually, but also the private sectors have been driving its forces to, engage in the business in the Indo-Pacific. At the same time that you have our own, military forces have a more robust kind of engagement in Asia. Many of the European states has its own kind of territorial backgrounds in Asia-Pacific that has to be backed up by its own force presence, and together that will create the huge opportunity for regional partners to have a joint exercises and training, and also with the defense industry cooperation with each other. And that is basically good for us. Why? Because, China colleague may, feel uncomfortable with it, but whenever China faced with a problem in the vicinity, they define that all issues are domestic. Taiwan domestic, East China Sea domestic, South China Sea domestic. But when Europe comes into the place, and no, this is a global issue. And you really have to internationalize the problem to, maintain the status quo. And that issue that the Europe comes in, and that is a huge force multiplier to create the norms that this issue needs to be solved internationally. Europe has a normative power to play in Asia. Vice versa, Kishida and President Yoon Suk-yeol and Prime Minister Albanese and all the Australian, Korea, and also Japanese participation to the NATO summit and to represent that the kind of cohesiveness of what the NATO has been responding to Ukraine is the matter of East Asian concern. And those are the kind of vice versa. If we are in the problem, we wish that the European players to do the same in return. And those are, I think, the very important perspective that you cannot really divide the situation, and also that the President Macron's statement during his visit to China was a bit concerning processes that he thinks that that this issue can be the secondary. I think that has not been moderated in a way. But I think that those kind of sense of the indivisibility is something that is pretty much important. And finally, I was quite encouraged by hearing my panel colleague Dr. Chen mention about Japan, about that really represent the Chinese confidence in managing the neighbor relationship. And for Chinese diplomacy, neighboring diplomacy is very important under the concept of creating the stability. And Japan-China is also fit into that concept. 20 years ago, whenever we talk about strengthening of the defense, China criticized every step that Japan has made during that age. But look at what the historic decision that we made in 2022. China remained to be confident in managing this issue. This is the fundamental change of the Japan-China relationship, and I think it is a good move in terms of not overemphasizing the provocative issues, avoiding the kind of unnecessary escalation between the two sides, and then to look at the most defensive kind of, structure of how we can really create the deterrence in two sides, and then to look at the other issues, because once the stalemate is happened, we have to look at the other issues. And secondly, something that I also would like to say, in addition to the perception of the US-Japan alliance, it is true that the United States requests us to do more in terms of making our alliance as stable as possible, because we need to pay a fair share in the alliance. But at the same time, look at how Japan plays its role in shaping the regional economic order by creating the CPTPP without the United States, right? And then the United States withdraw from the processes, but we maintain the TPP standards, and they created the institution without the United States. That also applies to RCEP, which is the Japan, China, Korea's all part of it. And we also have its own stance on many of the regional engagement without the United States. And this is where the kind of Japanese diplomatic autonomy comes into place. Whenever Japan goes to the region, and if you have a framing that Japan is together with the United States, you may miss the point, because Japan has its own role to play in this region. This is something related to what the Dr. Chiaki Aoi told about the shaping of its environment, and that is not shaping through the military might, but it is a shaping through those diplomacy, creating of the architecture, and this is where the Indo-Pacific comes into play. And Japan is one of the early launcher of the Indo-Pacific. Now that the more than 50 countries subscribe to this concept, this has become the gravity concept, and Japan maintains its own kind of Indo-Pacific approach without creating the huge kind of doctrinal approach on the Indo-Pacific, but we are doing more like a bazaar diplomacy with 51 items in the new plans, and everybody can pick and choose because we are conscious about the diversity of the region. And this is how that Japan is now playing in this region, which I believe that is very constructive in the end.
The scenario of fragmentation we are talking now here, at least we are using very much the expression of diplomacy à la carte, but your bazaar diplomacy is a similar one, so it might be even more attractive. So we are running out of time, but we still have 5 minutes for some questions. If you want, please raise your hands, otherwise we can conclude here. Is there any question more? Please, here. The microphone is coming.
Europe and Asia after the war in Ukraine? Are you going so far in the future? You said we failed in deterrence. We had warnings. We had Crimea, we had Donbass, we had the phony elections in those countries. We have it now, with China occupying the small islands, artificial and natural. Actually, we choose to be perceived as attacked. We went a long way in order to be perceived as the attacked country. Is there a defense? Probably the only defense. Is there a defense beyond trying to win the heads and hearts of the world's population? That is why India is so important, is so damn large.
Thank you. Any more questions? So we can conclude with some few minutes, one minute each for conclude our session and reacting to these important words. What can you say about the role of, we can start from you, Chen Yinding, the role of, it is real that defense is back, and what can we assess for the coming future? Of course, the war in Ukraine is here, and we still don't know till when. But so, in few words, using a tweet or a X, what can you say about that?
Well, I can agree that defense is not back. I mean, in several sense. I mean, I attended a conference in Hong Kong about 2 weeks ago. A former American senior government official commented that maybe he was biased and I was biased. He said 10 years from now, people will forget about the Russia-Ukraine war because it is not as important as we are talking about today. And I totally understand from a European perspective, it's happening here around. But from a great long history perspective, it's not as important as climate change and the rise of AI, which could be a threat to the whole humanity, right? So compared with that, I don't think Russia-Ukraine war will be remembered as a very important, event in 10 years' time. But he could be wrong, I could be wrong, but I agree with him in that assessment. So I'm more optimistic. I don't think defense will be our central concern for the next 5 to 10 years. It is always there, but it's not as, sort of a grave threat as, people understand. Now Europe becomes energy independent and so on and so forth, which is a good sign for the long-term stability and
We
peace.
will invite you in 10 years to check this statement. Please, Elise, your final word.
Well, I would disagree looking at defense budget. The world, aggregated, the world is spending twice more in military equipment today than it used to do 20 years ago. And of course, the war in Ukraine has consequences because, as Professor Ken also mentioned, not just in Europe but other countries in Asia are anticipating war, but all-style war on that territory. And the fact that we had mixed anticipation, mixed assessment of the potentiality of a war on the European territory itself is an issue. So I think war is back. There is a lot of discussion about Cold War, Grey War, whatever. It's proper war, all-style war, whatever we call it. But along with it goes a rearmament of the world, not just of Europe, of Asia and beyond. And also, again, I go back to that, but it's dear to me because I think it's taking place. Coalition shaping, fragmentation of the world that is increasingly bipolar, and that also leads to security partnership within that pole that are reinforced step by step.
Thank you. Professor Shah?
I also agree that defense is back, but we need to look at it from much broader than just defense spending of countries. We also have to look at it in terms of how defense and military is now increasingly becoming a component shaping bilateral relations, or even say bilateral relations between countries. So in that way also defense is back. But what the Russia-Ukraine war, I'll just put it in a minute, has taught us is that territorial disputes, there had been debates long that whether there will ever be a war in the South China Sea. But I think everybody used to say the answer is no. I'm not relating the two, but I'm just saying that, what Russia-Ukraine war has taught us is that territorial disputes can in any time take the shape of war, or it can take a shape of a long-term, if not an outright war, but in some form, it's going to disturb the rules-based or the international order in the Indo-Pacific. So in that way, I think this war does teach a lesson that, and it also brought countries together and brought around more discussions and debates on what, countries, how they need to work together to ensure a rules-based order in the Indo-Pacific. So I think these are the two lessons in my view.
Thank you. Kenjimbo?
Yeah, in terms of perspective of Japan, definitely defense is back, and my personal take is it's a long overdue. And that was a historic change that we experienced in last December, and my hunch is that next 5 years is a tremendously the different phase of the defense policy that we are experiencing. We don't know how sustainable that our defense commitment might be in the next 10 or 15 years because of the fiscal pressure, aging society, structural kind of constraints. All matters to how much that the defense has been continually be back on the processes. And eventually, Japanese government has constantly saying that we are against the forceful change of the status quo by force, right? According to what you have mentioned, and as I mentioned earlier, that the world is changing quite rapidly, distribution of power, rising of the nations, but we are not spending quite a good energy to change the international system in accordance with those changes. So if we are stick on the stability of maintaining of the status quo, that is not the answer to the international system, because India is on the rise, and India requires the proportional representation in the international politics that is conducive to the distribution of power. And I don't think that the G7 and the United States and those who has been leading for the past 70 years post-war period is sincerely trying to adapt themselves in the new world. And this is I think, the voice of the Global South, which we really need to take very seriously. But if we are ready to change the status quo, we have to do it peacefully.
Thank you. We are experiencing a lot of transition in international scenario, and so probably we will have to have more chance to talk I hope in the next 6th edition of this Era in Europe initiative. So thank you very much for being here. Thank you to IFRI, ASDP. Thank you to all our guests, Chen Ning, Alice Ekman, Pramesha Sao, Ken Jimbo for being here with us. Thank you to the speaker of the review session. Of course, thank you to you all for being here till late. We are only 10 minutes late, but you stay here, so I guess you enjoyed this discussion as much as it. So thank you very much, and see you soon at ISPI.